Mr. Speaker, the Biden administration's Department of Labor has announced a new independent contractor rule that amounts to one of the most potentially harmful economic policies that has come out of this administration or any administration in recent history. It's estimated that this new rule, which restricts significantly the ability to be an independent contractor, to work as a freelancer, to be your own boss, that it could cost upwards of 3.2 to 3.6 million full and part-time jobs. And here's the thing, this is not a matter of speculation. Sometimes when you have a proposed policy, you can do an economic analysis and try to forecast what the effects might be. But in this case, we know exactly what the effects are going to be because we have already seen them play out in California. This new independent contractor rule is based upon California's infamous AB 5 law, which was signed by Governor Gavin Newsom in 2019. The effects of that law have been absolutely devastating. In fact, a study out of George Mason University just a few weeks ago found that the law in and of itself has reduced self-employment in California by over 10% and has reduced overall employment by over 4%. That's potentially hundreds of thousands of jobs that have been lost in California because of this one law. And that's what really makes this law uniquely devastating, is that California has a lot of very harmful labor and economic policies, and we're seeing a lot from this administration as well. And oftentimes as a worker, as an entrepreneur, as a small business owner, there's a death by a million cuts effect where the costs imposed on your enterprise just add up to the point that things don't pencil out and you have to close down shop, lay people off, or move out of the state. Well, AB 5 was different in that it was one particular law that by itself cost many, many people their livelihoods, completely upended their whole career with the stroke of a pen. And we saw this effect immediately after AB 5 passed in 2019. Before it had even taken effect, we heard countless stories of people who all of a sudden had no ability to earn a living. The careers that they'd built over years, over decades, were snatched from them, were taken away with the effect of this one single law. And so after the law went into effect, in a matter of weeks, we compiled a whole book full of stories, AB 5 stories, and many, many more have been added since. And as this new rule is about to take effect, I'm planning to share some of those stories with the American public so that folks who are outside California know what is in store if and when this new Biden administration labor rule takes effect. So for today's story, this is from John, who very shortly after AB 5 took effect, he said that because he's a guest orchestral conductor and says, I depend on my contractor status to maintain sustainable fees, well, not fleecing orchestras. He says, because of this bill, AB 5, I just lost my first scheduled job with an orchestra. $9,000 that would have put a dent in my student loans or helped pay my insurance, paid for food and shelter, is now gone, all because of AB 5. And there are countless other stories that I'll be sharing from this floor. If you're an independent contractor in California who lost your livelihood because of AB 5, please feel free to reach out and share your story with my office so that I can share it with folks across the country and certainly folks here in this House of Representatives as a warning about what the effects of this legislation are going to be. Now, we are fighting against this policy, this new independent contractor rule, which will destroy millions of livelihoods. We are fighting against it in every way that we can, using every tool available. First, I'm introducing legislation under the Congressional Review Act to nullify the new rule. This is a fast-track procedure where Congress can override an executive agency. Second, I've secured language in the Labor Appropriations Bill providing that no funds may be spent to enforce the rule. This would effectively render it a dead letter. Third, I've joined with Representative Elise Stefanik to author the Modern Worker Empowerment Act, which creates a clear legal standard to protect independent workers. Fourth, I've endorsed the Department of Labor Succession Act, which has already passed through committee, which is going to stop Acting Secretary Julie Su from remaining in that position indefinitely. Julie Su is Biden's nominee to be Secretary of Labor. She was rejected by the Senate. Her nomination was returned after almost a year last year in the face of bipartisan opposition. Yet President Biden has insisted on keeping her at the helm of the Labor Department as an unconfirmed secretary. Why is that? Because Julie Su was the architect of AB 5 itself. She was Gavin Newsom's Secretary of Labor in California and was the chief enforcer of AB 5, which is why, for anyone who questions that the new national policy is based on AB 5, why in the world would they promote, of all people, the architect and lead enforcer of AB 5 into this new rule, if not to do the exact same thing for the whole country? Fifth, as chair of the House Subcommittee on Workforce Protections, I will continue to conduct rigorous oversight of the Department of Labor, and we will do everything possible to protect this administration, to protect American workers against this independent contractor rule and other administration overreaching policies. And finally, it's worth mentioning that there are now 2 different lawsuits as we anticipated, challenging the independent contractor rule. One is reviving a previous challenge to a previous version of this rule on procedural grounds. And then a second that was recently filed by a group called Fight for Freelancers that has partnered with the Pacific Legal Foundation is challenging the rule itself on a few grounds. On the ground that it doesn't comply with the statutory authority that has been granted to the agency, that it violates a statute that prohibits arbitrary rulemaking by an agency. And finally, it is a constitutional challenge saying that the vagueness of the law essentially amounts to a violation of due process. So that is all to say that we have hope of stopping this destructive policy from taking effect. And I will continue to share the stories of those who have already been affected in California in hopes that we can save millions of American workers the same fate.